They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine on a silver platter, the kind my father's company manufactures for five-star hotels worldwide. My husband shattered my leg with a baseball bat because I dared to speak back to his mistress. He thought I was nobody. An orphan. Powerless. He was wrong. And by the time he discovered the truth, his entire world had already crumbled to dust. My name is Emma Chin, though for 3 years of marriage I was just Emma Morgan. Plain Emma. Forgettable Emma. The woman who worked from home as a freelance translator while her husband climbed the corporate ladder. David never knew that the modest apartment we shared, the simple life we lived, was all a carefully constructed test. He never knew that my father is Robert Chin, one of the most powerful business magnates in the country. He never knew that I chose poverty over privilege because I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my last name. I met David 4 years ago at a coffee shop near my apartment. I just walked away from my third relationship with a man who only saw dollar signs when he looked at me. I was tired of being a prize to be won, a connection to be exploited. So I lied. When David asked about my family, I told him I grew up in foster care. I told him I had no one. And when he looked at me with what I thought was genuine love, when he said that we'd build a life together from nothing, I believed I'd finally found someone real. My father wasn't happy about it. Robert Chin didn't build an empire by trusting people easily, and he saw through David faster than I did. But he loved me enough to respect my choice. He agreed to stay away to let me live this experiment in normalcy. The only condition was that he kept security watching from a distance. I never saw them, but I knew they were there. It gave him peace of mind and it gave me freedom. For the first year I thought I'd made the right choice. David was attentive and loving. We'd spend evenings cooking together in our tiny kitchen, talking about our dreams. He'd tell me about his plans to become a senior manager, and I'd translate documents in 6 different languages while he massaged my shoulders. It felt real. It felt like partnership. But marriage changed things. Or maybe it just revealed what was always there. 6 months after our wedding, David started coming home late. Not occasionally, constantly. I'd be sitting at my desk finishing a translation project at 11 at night, and he still wouldn't be home. When he finally walked through the door at 1, 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, he'd smell like perfume. Expensive perfume. The kind I couldn't afford on my freelance income. I asked him about it once, gently, carefully. I said, "Baby, is everything okay at work? You seem so stressed lately." He looked at me with this flash of irritation, like I'd accused him of something terrible, and said, "I'm building a career, Emma. Some of us have ambitions beyond sitting at home all day. My clients demand attention. If you can't understand that, maybe you should try getting a real job." It felt like he'd slapped me. I made decent money translating, enough to pay half our bills. But suddenly it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. The criticism started slowly and then accelerated. He'd comment on my clothes, saying I dressed like a college student instead of a professional's wife. He'd push away dinner saying it was too salty, too bland, too something. He'd compare me to women at his office, talking about how sophisticated they were, how they understood the demands of corporate life. I started feeling smaller and smaller in my own home. Then I found the receipts. I wasn't snooping, I was looking for a warranty in his desk drawer, and there they were. Dozens of receipts for jewelry I'd never seen, dinners at restaurants we couldn't afford, hotel rooms charged to his credit card. When I confronted him, his face turned dark. He said, "Those are business expenses, Emma. Client meetings. If you can't trust me, maybe we have bigger problems." He made me feel crazy. Like I was the problem. Like my perfectly reasonable questions were paranoia and insecurity. I started checking his phone when he was in the shower. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. That's when I found the messages. Hundreds of them from someone saved as V in his contacts. Heart emojis. Intimate messages. Plans to meet. And photos. Photos of David with a stunning woman with perfect makeup and designer clothes, her arms wrapped around him like she owned him. My hands shook as I scrolled through months of conversations. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a relationship. A whole separate life he'd built without me. When he came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the bed with his phone in my hand. I said, "Who is V?" His face went through about 5 emotions in 2 seconds. Shock, anger, calculation. Then he grabbed the phone from me and said, "You went through my phone? What's wrong with you?" "That's Veronica, a colleague. We're friends." This is exactly why I can't talk to you anymore. You've become obsessive and controlling. He turned it around on me. Made me the villain for discovering his betrayal. David started mentioning Veronica all the time after that. Praising her openly. Veronica closed a major deal today. Veronica got promoted. Veronica just bought a new car. It was like he wanted me to know. Like he was taunting me with her existence, daring me to say something so he could call me jealous and insecure again. I should have left then. I should have called my father and walked away. But I kept thinking about the man I fell in love with, wondering if I could somehow bring him back. I kept blaming myself, thinking maybe if I was prettier, more sophisticated, more something, he'd love me again. I know now that was the abuse talking. When someone tears you down piece by piece, you start believing you deserve it. The breaking point came at his company dinner. David told me it was executives only, that I couldn't attend. But something in my gut told me I needed to be there. So I got dressed in my best outfit, which still wasn't much, and I showed up. The restaurant was upscale, the kind with dim lighting and wine lists thicker than novels. I walked in and immediately saw David across the room. He had his arm around a woman who could only be Veronica. She was everything I wasn't: glamorous, confident, draped in designer labels. They were laughing together and he was looking at her the way he used to look at me years ago. I walked over, my heart pounding. Several of David's colleagues recognized me and looked uncomfortable. David saw me and his expression shifted from shock to fury in an instant. Before he could say anything, Veronica turned and looked me up and down with this smirk. She said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Oh, is this the little housewife? David told me you were plain, but I didn't realize you'd be this forgettable." People turned to stare. My face burned with humiliation, but I found my voice. I said, "I'm his wife. And you need to stay away from my husband." Veronica laughed. Actually laughed like I'd told the funniest joke. She said, "Wife? Please. You're just a placeholder until he finds someone better. Which he has, me." She stepped closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're pathetic. A nobody who should know her place." I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me, to tell her she was out of line. Instead, he grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt and hissed, "Why did you come here? You're humiliating me. Go home. Now." Something broke in me then. Not my spirit. My fear. I said, "I'm not going anywhere without you. We need to talk about this." David's grip tightened. He dragged me toward the exit while Veronica followed, enjoying the scene. In the parking lot, away from witnesses, David shoved me against a car. I stumbled, caught myself. Veronica stood behind him with her arms crossed, looking triumphant. She said, "This is so sad, David. Just tell her the truth. Tell her you're done with her." I was shaking with rage and heartbreak. When Veronica stepped closer and actually spat at me, calling me pathetic, something snapped. I slapped her across the face. Hard. He staggered back, shocked. And David exploded. He went to his car trunk and pulled out a baseball bat. I didn't even have time to run. He came at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Pure rage, like I wasn't even human to him anymore. He swung the bat at my leg with full force. The pain was indescribable. I heard the crack before I felt it. Then agony shot through my entire body and I collapsed, screaming. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just lay there on the concrete, my leg bent at an angle that wasn't natural, screaming for help. David stood over me, breathing hard, the bat still in his hand. He said, "You embarrassed me. You hit Veronica. You needed to learn your lesson about respect." Veronica looked down at me, her hand still on her reddened cheek, and said coldly, "Now you know what happens to women who don't know when they're beaten." Then they left. They got in David's car and drove away together while I lay there in agony. They just left me. A security guard found me maybe 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours. He called an ambulance. The EMTs asked what happened and I lied. I said it was a random attack, someone trying to rob me. Even then, even after everything, I was protecting David. That's what abuse does to you. It makes you protect your abuser. The hospital was a blur of pain and surgery. They had to put pins and rods in my leg. The doctor said the break was severe, that I'd need months of physical therapy, that I might walk with a permanent limp. I lay in that hospital bed alone, staring at the ceiling, and something inside me went cold. David didn't call. He didn't visit. For 3 days I heard nothing. On the 4th day he walked into my hospital room. No flowers. No apology. Just a manila envelope that he tossed onto my bed. He said, I want a divorce. Sign these. Veronica is pregnant and I'm going to marry her instead. I stared at him. At this man I'd loved enough to give up everything for. He looked impatient, like I was inconveniencing him by being in a hospital bed with a shattered leg that he'd shattered. He added, You'll get nothing. You came into this marriage with nothing and you'll leave with nothing. You should be grateful I married you at all. Sign the papers, Emma. Don't make this difficult. Then he left again. I looked at those divorce papers for a long time. I thought about the girl who'd walked into that coffee shop 4 years ago, so desperate to be loved for herself that she'd hidden her entire identity. I thought about every moment I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less. I thought about how I'd let this man tear me apart piece by piece because I wanted to believe in a love that never actually existed. And then I picked up my phone and called the one number I swore I'd never use except in emergencies. My father answered on the first ring. His voice was tight, controlled. He said, Emma. He already knew. Of course he knew. His security team had been watching. They'd seen everything. They'd followed the ambulance. They'd been waiting for me to call. I said, Daddy. I need to come home. My voice broke on the word home and I heard my father's sharp intake of breath. He said, I'm on my way. Hold on, sweetheart. Just hold on. Within 2 hours I was being transferred to the best private hospital in the country. Specialists flew in from around the world. My room went from a cramped semi-private space to a luxury suite with round-the-clock care. The medical staff treated me like royalty because, well, I was. When my father walked in, I barely recognized him at first. Robert Chin in a business suit is intimidating. Robert Chin in casual clothes with fear and fury in his eyes is something else entirely. He sat beside my bed, took my hand carefully and said, Tell me everything. And tell me who did this to my daughter. So I told him. Everything. The isolation, the emotional abuse, the cheating, the betrayal, and finally the parking lot. By the time I finished, my father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. He said, Give me his name, Emma. I'll destroy him. Today. I believed him. Robert Chin hadn't built an empire by making empty threats. But I said, No. Not yet. I want to do this myself. I want them to know it was me. My father studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He said, Then we do it your way. But we do it right. Within 24 hours, my father's investigators had compiled a complete dossier on David Morgan and Veronica Lane. I learned that David's company had been desperately pursuing investment from Chin Enterprises for a major expansion project. I learned that Veronica's family business was hemorrhaging money and stayed afloat through contracts with companies in my father's network. I learned that David had debts I never knew about, that he'd been living beyond his means, that he'd been counting on that promotion and that investment to save his career. I learned that I held all the cards. I always had. I just hadn't known it. I looked at my father across the stack of documents and said, I want them to lose everything. The way they thought I had nothing, I want that to be their reality. My father smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. He said, Then let's give them enough rope to hang themselves. Let David think he's won first. So I signed the divorce papers. No contest. No demands. I took nothing except my personal belongings from that apartment. Clothes I'd paid for with my own money, books, my laptop. David was shocked. He'd expected me to beg, to fight. Instead I walked away cleanly. David celebrated. He told his friends he'd escaped his useless wife, and was upgrading to someone worthy of him. Veronica posted photos on Instagram of her and David, her hand on her still flat stomach. Captions about new beginnings and blessings. She even posted a photo of her engagement ring with the caption, When you know, you know. David got his promotion at work the same week the divorce was finalized. Everything was falling into place for him perfectly. He had no idea the ground beneath his feet was already crumbling. 2 weeks after our divorce, David's company held an emergency all-hands meeting. Chin Enterprises had agreed to consider their investment proposal. This was massive. The kind of deal that could make careers. And Robert Chin himself would be personally evaluating their company. David was assigned to the presentation team. He was ecstatic. This was his moment. His chance to prove himself at the highest level. On the day of the meeting, David walked into the conference room in his best suit, carrying his presentation materials ready to impress. He froze in the doorway. At the head of the table sat my father, Robert Chin, in full business mode, impeccably dressed, radiating the kind of power that makes people instinctively straighten their spines. And standing beside him, poised and elegant in an expensive business suit I'd had custom-made, was me. My father's voice was cool and professional. He said, "Gentlemen, thank you for hosting us today. This is Emma Chin, Vice President of Chin Enterprises, and my daughter. She'll be leading the evaluation of your company." I watched the color drain from David's face. His hands started shaking. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The other executives looked confused, clearly trying to figure out why David suddenly looked like he might pass out. I smiled. Not warmly. I said, "Hello, David. Shall we discuss business?" The presentation was a disaster. David could barely string sentences together. Every time I asked a question, and I asked many, each one precisely calculated to expose weaknesses in their proposal, he stammered and sweated. His colleagues kept looking at him, frustrated and confused. This wasn't the confident David Morgan they knew. I took extensive notes. Asked about company culture. About leadership ethics. About their values. All while maintaining perfect professional courtesy. At the end of the meeting I said, "Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch with our decision within the week." David tried to approach me as we were leaving. He said, "Emma, My father stepped between us smoothly. He said, "Miss Chin doesn't have time for informal discussions. All communications should go through proper channels. Good day." We left David standing there, his career hanging by a thread. 3 days later, Chin Enterprises released their evaluation. After careful consideration, we have significant concerns about company leadership and ethical standards. We will not be moving forward with investment at this time. David's company stock plummeted. The board was furious. David was demoted immediately, blamed for losing the deal. His boss called him into the office and told him he'd sabotaged their biggest opportunity, that his inability to maintain composure had cost them millions. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I scheduled a meeting with Veronica's father. His family business specialized in event planning for corporate clients. When I walked into his office with my team, he was obsequious and eager, clearly hoping Chin Enterprises might become a client. I let him pitch his services. Then I said pleasantly, "Actually, Mr. Lane, I'm here about your existing contracts. I've been conducting a comprehensive review of all our partnerships. I'm interested in companies that align with Chin Enterprises' values: integrity, respect, ethical behavior." His smile faltered. I continued, "I've noticed that about 60% of your current revenue comes from companies within our network. Companies we have significant influence over." I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. I said, "We're terminating our relationships with companies that don't meet our standards. I'm sure you understand this is purely a business decision." Within a month, Veronica's family business lost contract after contract. Clients who'd been with them for years suddenly found other vendors. The revenue stream dried up almost overnight. They were facing bankruptcy. And Veronica blamed David. She knew exactly who I was now. Everyone did. Her father called David, screaming that he'd brought the wrath of the Chin family down on them by being stupid enough to abuse a billionaire's daughter. The social media posts came down. Veronica's Instagram went private. The engagement photos disappeared. But I still wasn't finished. I scheduled a press conference. Chin Enterprises was launching a major domestic violence awareness initiative, and I was going to be the face of it. I stood beside my father in front of cameras from every major news outlet and shared my story. I didn't name David directly, but I didn't have to. I described everything: the emotional abuse, the isolation, the betrayal, and finally, the assault that left me with a broken leg and months of physical therapy. I said, "I was attacked by someone who thought I was powerless." He was wrong. No woman is powerless, and no abuser should feel safe. I'm using my position and my resources to ensure that survivors have support, that abusers face consequences, and that no one else has to feel the way I felt in that parking lot. The press loved it. Photos surfaced of me at high society events with my father, establishing my identity publicly. Society blogs ran stories connecting the dots. David's and Veronica's social media exploded with people figuring out exactly who the someone was. Former friends abandoned them. Veronica was dropped by every sponsor. Her influencer career evaporated. David became a pariah, the man who'd beaten a billionaire's daughter with a baseball bat. Job applications went unanswered. No company wanted to be associated with him. Veronica broke off their engagement when the money and status she'd been chasing disappeared. She moved back to her parents' house in disgrace while her father's business collapsed. David lost everything. His job, his reputation, his fiancée, his future. And then, as I knew he would, he came to find me. Security called to tell me David Morgan was at the gate of my father's estate. I told them to let him through. My father started to object, but I said, I want to face him. I need to. So they let David in. He walked into the sitting room where I was having tea with my father. I was still using a cane then. My leg was healing but slowly. David looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled clothes, dark circles under his eyes. He saw me and exploded. You lied to me, he screamed. You pretended to be nobody. You trapped me. I stood up carefully, leaning on my cane. I said, I didn't lie, David. I simply didn't tell you about my family because I wanted to be loved for myself. And you showed me exactly who you are. You've destroyed my life, he shouted. My career is over. Veronica left me when the money dried up. You've taken everything. My voice went cold. I said, no, David. You took everything from me first. My trust, my love, my sense of safety. You broke my leg and threw me away like garbage. I simply ensured you understood what it feels like to be powerless. He lunged at me then. Actually lunged like he was going to hit me again. But my father stepped between us so fast David barely saw him move, and suddenly security had David's arms pinned behind his back. I continued speaking, my voice steady. I'm pressing charges for assault. The district attorney has video evidence from that parking lot. The restaurant had security cameras. We have medical records. You're going to prison, David. He collapsed then. Literally fell to his knees. Please, Emma. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Please. I looked down at him. This man who'd made me feel so small. Who'd convinced me I was worthless. He looked pathetic now, broken and desperate. I felt nothing. I said, you had your chance to be sorry. Every day of our marriage when you chose cruelty. You don't get redemption now that there are consequences. You get justice. My father's voice was quiet but deadly. He said, and if you ever come near my daughter again, prison will be the least of your worries. I've destroyed bigger men than you for far less. Security escorted David out in handcuffs. The DA was already waiting outside to arrest him formally. I watched through the window as they put him in the car. The trial was quick. The evidence was overwhelming. David Morgan was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 3 years in prison. His lawyer tried to argue for leniency, but the judge looked at the medical records, the video footage and the testimony and showed no mercy. David's professional reputation was permanently destroyed. Even after prison, no one in his industry would touch him. He was blacklisted, unemployable. Veronica's family business declared bankruptcy. She deleted all her social media after the harassment became overwhelming. People sent her messages about karma, about getting what she deserved. She tried to send me an apology letter from her parents' house where she'd moved back in, but I returned it unopened. I didn't need her apology. I needed her to understand that actions have consequences. The company where David worked implemented new policies on workplace harassment and domestic violence awareness, partially funded by Chin Enterprises. Something good came from something terrible. As for me, I threw myself into physical therapy with single-minded determination. I was going to walk without that cane if it killed me. My therapist said I was her most stubborn patient. I took it as a compliment. I also discovered I had a talent for business. My father brought me into Chin Enterprises and I found I loved the strategy, the negotiations, the challenge of it. I'd spent years making myself small, hiding my intelligence. Now I let it shine. My father and I grew closer than we'd ever been. I realized how much I'd missed having family, how lonely I'd been trying to prove I didn't need anyone. He told me he'd respected my choice to live independently, but every day I was gone had killed him a little. Now we had lunch together twice a week and he taught me everything about running the empire he'd built. I started a foundation for domestic violence survivors. I used my story, my resources, my connections to help other women find their voices. I spoke at events. I funded shelters. I made sure no one would feel as alone as I'd felt in that hospital bed. I went to therapy too. Trauma doesn't just disappear because you get revenge. I had to process what had happened, learn to trust again, understand that David's abuse wasn't my fault. It was hard work, but I did it. 6 months after the trial, I walked across the stage at a charity gala without my cane. I'd practiced for weeks, worked through the pain, built up the strength. When I reached the podium to give my speech about survival and resilience, the standing ovation was deafening. I talked about my journey. About hiding who I was and the price I paid for it. About learning that true strength isn't about making yourself small. It's about taking up space unapologetically. About how trauma can break you or it can forge you into something stronger. After the speech, I stood on the balcony of my father's estate, looking out over the city lights. The same city where I'd once lived in that small apartment, making myself invisible. The same city where David had broken my leg and left me in a parking lot. I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. I'd spent so long trying to be lovable by making myself less. I'd thought love meant sacrifice, meant diminishing yourself to make someone else comfortable. I'd been so wrong. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink. Real love doesn't come with fists and cruelty. Real love doesn't break you and abandon you in your darkest moment. My husband thought breaking my leg would teach me my place. Instead, it taught me my worth. I am Emma Chin. I am my father's daughter. I am the woman who survived, who fought back, who took her power back. And I am nobody's victim. Not anymore. Not ever again. Behind me, I heard the door open. My father joined me on the balcony, handing me a glass of wine. He didn't say anything, just stood beside me, solid and steady. The family I'd pushed away because I was afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons. I smiled and raised my glass to the city below. To second chances. To justice. To becoming the person I was always meant to be. Somewhere out there, David was in a prison cell and Veronica was living in her parents' basement, and they were both finally understanding what it meant to lose everything. The thought didn't make me happy exactly, but it made me feel balanced. Like the scales had finally evened out. I turned away from the balcony and walked back inside, my father beside me. My leg ached a little. It always would, a permanent reminder of that night. But I walked with my head high and my shoulders back, and I didn't hide anymore. The girl who'd lied about being an orphan was gone. The woman who'd remained was stronger, wiser, and completely unbreakable. And that, I decided, was the best revenge of all.